Uh, oh no, I hope I don't have to read that. So when we met, this council was seated. We didn't accept the scope of work that had been previously done. We didn't choose to engage in the next phase of scoping out that work with a consultant, and requested to follow up with more information so council could make a decision on next steps. And so Rob Yerxa is here, staff is here tonight, but Rob in particular is here tonight to talk about where we've been, what our needs are, where we may be going in the future. And maybe I'm going to prime the pump. I'm going to ask Rob a couple questions so we can just all jump in. So really, I thought the questions that we left with at our last meeting, last time we discussed that sort of, is the town able to do this work on its own, or what is our path going forward? And given what we have, which is not an insignificant amount of background material, right? It's not exactly what we asked for, but we have some material. How do we go forward? So that question is not technical. That's just sort of procedural, right? So what are our capacities within town staff to carry this project forward? And what do we have already that would sort of be a launch pad for us?
So I do think conversation about next steps is important, because that's really, I hope that's why we're here now. So I have a difficult time answering your question because I don't know what the project is. So that is really the issue, is what are council's goals in terms of what this project would look like. So and what's our budget? How would we? So there's some questions I would have to have answered from you all first to really dig into that. But we have, so like you said, it's not an insignificant amount of information already put together. The report identifies a laundry list of things that should or need to be done. So if that's where we're starting, then I would want to understand what the priorities of council is. So what are we, and maybe it's a situation where we bring a few different options to you, but either way, we need some more information regarding a bunch of the existing conditions, material, what specific deficiencies are there in all the mechanical systems, what improvements can be made, what can't be done within the existing footprint of the building. Because if one of the core issues that was identified in the report is that both agencies are significantly outgrowing the space that they're asking to operate in. So can't make the building any bigger. So, I guess there's a lot of overlap there, that if the issue is to make the building, so technically speaking, the way the building sits, it meets code, because it meets the codes that were current when the building was constructed. The minute we begin to do any significant improvements, renovations to the building, new codes come into play. And so it's sort of this Pandora's box of work that has to be done outside of what maybe, fix the HVAC, but we can't fix it. If we're going to fix the HVAC, which is a significant project, now we got to look at the electrical, plumbing systems to bring those all up to code. Not to mention some of the other structural issues that were identified in the plan. So it's a really tough question to answer without a little bit more information, to be honest with you. Do I need to do, and without a clear message on what the goals are?
So if I could interrupt for just a minute, to say, first, I think, Rob, the other question you haven't answered is about staff capacity, but let's wait just a minute. I think when I look at this report, if you take this report as well done report, thoughtful report, it's telling you without any basis that we have an air quality issue next door. It is telling you that it is severely undersized for operations. And it is completely set up with no hard background as a argument for building a new police station and renovating that building to be a fire station. The question that I think staff was hoping to get answered was, what are the deficiencies in the building and how much would it cost to methodically take care of them in a way that may allow for future use of the building, or the building configured in a different way or added on to, or something of that capacity. So I think it is, that report doesn't answer the question for Rob. If you look at the Sebago report in the appendices and you look at what they got from Allied analyzing existing conditions, it was very clear what the deficiencies were, what the costs were, and also in a prioritized way, how you should tackle those costs. So I think that is, if you're looking to scrap the building or to do a brand new construction, then use this report as the building is way too small and it doesn't meet code. That isn't what the question we asked, but maybe that's the question that council's fine with having answered. Did I just?
Yes. Just from my perspective, I thought, I guess, that we're coming to this meeting. I really think that this is sort of we've got a facilities maintenance issue and we have a spacing issue that this started from a report from Chief Lowe and former chief. My take was, I don't like the idea of paying a consultant to come tell us what we need for space. My assumption is people working in the building, we're doing it, we're working, it's working, but they know where the pinch points are. So I really think this is in my, what I was, I guess, expecting was we're gonna hear from staff on spacing, what's not working, what's critical, what do they think's critical, how much extra space, what could they get by with, what would be best case scenario. And then there's the whole facilities maintenance piece, which I really don't think staff, I mean, Rob, I guess to some degree, obviously that falls under you at this point, but I don't expect police and fire to come to us with like, here, the building has structural deficiencies. And if there's air quality, I really feel like these are two separate things that should be dealt with in parallel paths. And I don't, my opinion was paying another 70,000 for someone to come tell us what we need for space and assess what's wrong with, I mean, HVAC, we keep talking about HVAC. I really feel like if HVAC is an issue, we should be getting quotes on the system, regardless of what's going to happen in 3 to 5 or however many years in that building. If we've got a failing HVAC system that controls this building and that building, we obviously need to be dealing with that. And I think in 95, when that was built, there's no such really heat pumps. Maybe they were around then, but I mean, I think that system that we have has to be maintained kind of regardless. We're not crashing a building. So I mean, these buildings are going to be here. Maybe there's expansions, but I feel like these should be looked at in separate tracks from usage, where I feel like we know our staff knows better. I assume now we can pay a consultant to come in and say, oh, well, we need 50,000 more square feet, but that's not realistic, obviously. So I think taking the approach of this is what we have, this is our deficiency, this is where we're really pinched, and this is what we think we need. That understanding that it's really kind of going through that original document even, and that was submitted. It was a memo. And, you know, maybe half of those things are gone, but the majority of those things were maintenance issues on there. And that, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily need to come from staff that uses the building. You know, it's not their role. I mean, it's great that they've identified it and that we're gonna chase it down, but I think that's all that serves as. And then there's this is how we police, and this is what's really hard about our building right now, and this is how we do fire, and this is what's really hard about this building, and understanding that in more detail is kind of what I thought this was about, to be candid.
So,
And I did have a question too. So there was at some point $140,000 was approved for this thing. I think we've got 120,000 left. Is that right? And can you remind me, was that ARPA money?
Some of it, 110 is ARPA, 100 is ARPA, and the remainder is budget.
From a budget in 21? Or no?
No, it's rolled forward. It's in the current budget. Current 23 budget.
So 40 is in budget, 100 is ARPA. Right?
40 was original. We've got 20 right now, I think, in that neighborhood. I'd have to go back.
Okay, so the 20 we spent was from budget. Okay, and there's still 100 ARPA. Now it's 20 budget. Okay, all right, thanks. But yeah, that's after that last meeting, that's where my head was. I thought I did share that up the chain. That's what I was thinking. And if people have other thoughts, obviously.
So this what I'm hearing is that Leo wants to take a look at, we know our space is short, so you want to take a look at systems and systems maintenance, essentially.
Well, I mean, I want to hear how short is our space. I want to hear from the people using the space, like how it's hurting our ability to police and ability to provide fire support.
And I think if I could piggyback on that, I'm also curious, you know, as you're aware of other town spaces and buildings, and I think we all probably enjoy playing Tetris in our head to some degree about what offices could live where, and how could we make best use of all the town facilities if there are ideas about what portions of policing could live in this building, and then what portions of this building could go to Keith Anderson, or whatever the solution is for some of the spacing issues that would be reasonable.
So, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I'm kind of with Leo. I remember us talking at our last meeting about maybe actually going through the city report together. Because I have questions like, you know, is this space assessment, does this exactly match what, you know, Chief Lowe is feeling like he needs? Does it match exactly what police are feeling like they need? I feel like it might give us some structure to look at, you know, what's here and how it matches up with people's expertise here, because in here is the space needs and the mechanical things that Leo's addressing.
With the assumption that this report to me doesn't make the case that our space is adaptable or flexible.
Right.
Like this to me says, throw it out. We're getting ready to build a new one.
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily trust the space assessment
I
in
agree.
this document.
That's entirely what I'm saying. I'd
Yeah.
kind of like to go through it so I could hear what's off. Because I'm hearing from staff, like, this isn't what people wanted. They didn't
Well-
want an assessment saying we were going to get a brand new building or big additions. And I'm wondering which parts, you know, don't match. Or is the numbers off, or are the numbers right, but we have an idea of how to get this much space in the existing building? It would help me. Maybe no one else is interested in that. Is anyone else
No,
interested?
I think that's fine. I just don't think, okay, yeah, I mean, that's fine. So let's ask, do we know in any way what are the operations that are being constrained by our current space?
We know the operations, yeah.
Yeah.
We know that it's tight to keep vehicles in the bays. It's impossible to get some of our vehicles in the bays, like the rescue boat. So it's probably exposed to damage from somebody in the street. We have combined decontamination areas for both fire gear and equipment that we use to clean the ambulances with. The area around the pole where we slide down in the event of a call is congested in a potential hazard area. We know that there is congestion in the living quarters upstairs as far as movement in that area, places where people can sit, where they can eat, those types of things. Not super congested, but certainly congested. The bunk rooms are shared bunk rooms, and there's congestion in there when you get 2 or 3 people in a room who all have to have locker space and those types of things. We have congestion again on the apparatus bay where we store our fire gear when we're not working. We're out of space there. We're limited on where we can store fire hose. Our SCBA bottles are not stored in an ideal location. Those are the bottles that we wear when we go inside of our building. Hazardous materials storage is dislocated from the fire station. It's up at the Public Works building. We have a minimal amount here at the station, but it requires us to go off-site to do inspections and other things of that equipment to make sure that it's serviceable, those types of things. Fitness, yes, thank you. The fitness room is shares a space with the town's IT infrastructure. So if by some chance somebody makes a mistake up there, falls into a server unit or pulls a cable, then all of the potential that all of the town's IT, internet and whatnot could go out completely. Administration space, we're okay right now with offices. I have one staffer who's in an office with no windows. That's not necessarily the most comfortable place, but you know, it's certainly doable. Training space is very limited. I'm able to fit only so many people in the training area, so it's difficult to host classes. We'll bring outside departments in when we're getting ready to plan events or those types of things. Most of our training space right now is shared between us and the police department. So if they have something going on, it eliminates us being able to use that space. And typically that's not an issue except when we're trying to run programs or whatnot. Certainly we can schedule, but there are impromptu meetings that have to be had. And we at times struggle to have those meetings. I've had to come over and use the council chambers and those types of things. And that's not necessarily the best thing when you have outside people coming in, that type of stuff, where you want to kind of keep in your own space. Downstairs at the police department, the locker room is a joined locker room bathroom. There's no real separation. The urinals are in public display to those people that are changing in the male locker room. There is one stall that is closed off, but otherwise there's no separation, no privacy, no division. And immediately off that, there is basically a catch-all storage area where it's gotten to the point where things are just kind of piled. I hate to say it because there's no real rack storage or anything like that that can be put into that space. So the evidence locker is too small. I think the security for it is okay for right now, but it's certainly too small. It's difficult to get all the items in there that we need to get in there. It's difficult for tracking, those types of things. What's called.
I was gonna say the women's locker room, since you were there.
Oh, yes,
is
thank you.
when we had 3 women on staff, it was not usable and a source of many, many complaints.
Yep.
We don't have all 3 right now, but we bring another one on, we're gonna have a problem.
Thank you for bringing that up. There's an area known as the bullpen, and that's where the officers go in and work. And that's also an area where they process evidence. So within 4 feet of somebody testing for possible fentanyl, you may have an officer sitting in a computer terminal typing out reports. And then immediately off that area is another washroom that's a multi-gender washroom. That's just basically a closet that is off that area. And there can be up to 3 or 4 officers that are in that bullpen at a time working, depending on what's going on. The garage bay downstairs is very limited. We're not able to bring any cruisers inside to get them out of the weather, to keep them from idling during inclement weather, or to try to keep them cool so the electronics in them don't fry during the summer heat. Of course, if we leave the windows down in a police car, whether it's daytime or nighttime, it's subject to vandalism and theft. So that's why you see police cars idling out behind the police station, especially in the summertime, is because of the electronic gear that has to be temperature controlled. And if we're not able to bring them in the wintertime, then they have to stay running so that they are defrosted so that the officers can immediately deploy to incidents. These are just some of the big things that stand out to me. In terms of space, what is needed for space, I can tell you that basically what I told you, that's what we need. We need more of those things. But to actually figure out what square footage is where somebody who has the expertise in understanding formulas and how many square feet you need per person and how much handicap space I need in the training room, how much needs to be there, which would add on to that calculation, all those things. So that's where we run into trouble. I know what I need, but I don't know how to boil that down to actual square footage so that it's not too much square footage, not enough square footage.
That's what architects do.
That was my question, like in this Port City report, they give very specific square footage on page 4. Is this feel accurate to you? They basically say that the police need, they have 2,500 square feet and they need practically 6,000 more square feet. So 2 times beyond what they currently have added on. For fire, they say 50% up, so it's at 8,000 and they think you need to be at 12, so a 50% addition, but for the total thing, almost double, right? We have 12,000 square feet and they say we need 11,000 square feet more. Does that feel about right to you that we need about double the amount of space that we have? Or, I mean, I hear Sophie saying, we don't want to build another addition. Are these numbers close to accurate on the square footage we think we need, or do you guys feel like they're off is my real question.
I think that they are probably pretty close, but I don't know how to validate that based on the information that they're, that's the problem I have. And that's the problem with the entire report for us is we can't come back and validate to say, yes, we need to do this or yes, we need to do that without some outside support.
Well, that is outside support. So like you said, there are obvious calculations and formulas where you can plug X people, this many square feet per, and this is what you come out with. To say that we need, triple the size of our police station probably isn't realistic. So how much?
So Leo, have you been through the police station?
Love to.
I'd
No,
love to.
but
I'd love to, because when he talks about the bullpen is a little bit constrained. To understand when there are 3 people in an office set up for 4, and I want to walk in and see somebody, I can barely get into the doorway because people are literally packed in there like sardines. When you consider that there's no space to greet the public in that building, other than a training room, which is where the fire department is, you said, when he says there's sometimes overlap, on a daily basis, I go into that building and the crew has completely taken over the training room. Not once in a while, but all the time. That building
do
is.
they use this facility at all, or is that open to them? Or
Yeah, absolutely. But so it's also open to me, to Rob Yerxa, to what council needs. It's open to a lot of things. If you're going to do a 3-day training where you're bringing in all sorts of equipment, that can't sit in council chamber. And when it takes an hour and a half to set it up, is that really a productive use of time to set it up and take it down for 3 consecutive days? So I don't think you understand how undersized, especially the police department is. There is no space for a break room. We took a closet in a hallway and broke it out so that we could fit a refrigerator and a countertop as their break room. If more than one person takes a break at a time, then only one person can sit down.
So maybe it would be useful for us to talk real briefly about the other spaces the town owns before we dive into systems, like a look at HVAC and electrical. Because one thing that I've heard Sarah and Sonia and others mention is, well, let's brainstorm other spaces. And I think we've done that sort of on an ad hoc basis, and we did that partially when we did the other building assessment. But maybe council needs to do that.
Can I ask a question? So I really hear you loud and clear about the spaces. It seemed really clear to me from what you guys have said and from the report that the spaces are crazy undersized, especially for police. I think my question is more, if we're looking at needing double the space we have, and I don't want to build a new building or a big addition any more than anybody else does, but I don't really understand what the other solution is if we need double the space. Is it these other buildings that Jeff is talking about, or do you guys envision some other solution? I just can't figure how,
So Rob is going to jump in if I go astray,
right
but
on.
I think ultimately the answer might be, we need an addition or we need another building. I would much prefer, given the amount of work in the record that went into citing the current public safety building, and it seems like it's in a really good location in the community. My preference would be to try to stay here, even if we had to punch it out in some way. And, you do the brainstorming. Can we connect the two buildings and get space? Can we push it out into the parking lot? What can we do? Because pushing a building and adding on to a building is easier to maintain operations as opposed to demoing it and trying to build a new. We also learned from the public works process that siting a public building in Orono is a really difficult thing to do in terms of available space and location and things like that. So we're not saying we don't need space. I mean, I think part of the reason that staff feels like we really need expertise here is if we think we're gonna head down a path of needing to punch out the end of the building to add square footage, then wouldn't it make sense if we've got to replace an HVAC system today and we have an idea of what the size of that addition is going to be, that we work with somebody that will tell us how big it needs to be, where is it logical for us to terminate it so that it could simply be added on to as opposed to a whole new one installed later. I think even in the best of circumstances, an addition is going to be in the multi-millions. There is no way around that. It's not something that we're ready to take on today. There are living conditions that we need to address today. And I also think it would be important to see what kind of structural issues are there, because maybe there are issues in there that really do need to be addressed. Maybe there aren't. And I think that having the information gives us the ability to then make a plan. And I remember going through the space planning process with the Public Works Department. That was a lengthy process where the architect came in and worked and understood, really began to understand Rob's operation. Wasn't just, I Googled it and found what a Public Works Department does, but what did we do? How big were our trucks? How did we operate? And when we went through that process, Rob then worked with them to get it to a place that made sense. And we went from 7,000 square feet to 23,000 square feet.
From the old facility, 7,000 to about 17.
17, sorry. And when we built the building, we said, oh my word, that is huge. We're never going to fill it. And already, Rob has pretty much filled it. So
Programming phase of that project was probably the most valuable time spent when we created a plan for how much space we would need, how we would use that space, and then created a draft floor plan to meet those needs. As it turned out, the first one that we more or less got to was the one that got built. So, I mean, done correctly, there aren't a lot of iterations, not a lot of wasted work there. You know, I think it's important to note with the public, with this report, this is planning level analysis. This is based on a programming, based on the information that the architect was given by public safety staff. Best practices that they're from, you know, this firm was familiar with. Here's the kinds of rooms and the space based on the number of people in staff and the number of people that live here. But when you take that next step, and you begin to truly analyze what cost for an addition or cost for a new building or whatever solution you're pursuing gets to, it's probably not going to match up exactly to that. Because budget constraints are you're gonna, you know, we would bring draft floor plans to public safety staff to look at, say, does this make sense? Do you really need this much space? If you don't, we're gonna make it smaller, you know, those kinds of things. But that happens in the next step, in the next level of detail, the next planning level, so that we can continue to bring council accurate estimates for what this project is. Maybe you get to a dead end and you have to say, we can't meet that goal within the budget that we have, but I can't tell you that today.
When we talked to, I read your letter canceling the contract with the port group today before coming in, so I've never gotten a letter like that before, and I hope I never do. But the point
If
is,
somebody called you multiple times and
yeah,
had horrible interactions, you might get a letter like that.
yeah, it was pointed, but it also gives me, you know, caution in terms of the value of anything they provided, given what they, you know, they had a goal. It seems like they had a goal in mind. I heard Chief Lawyer, you know, I heard we talked about the constraints of the space you have now. I heard, you know, things like limited, shared, congested, inconvenient. Didn't hear prohibited or unsafe in terms of like functions that we absolutely aren't able to do now. Didn't hear anything about like, you know, the air quality stuff I think we touched on before in terms of whether it was safe or not. That's something that's a concern to me. And I say this as a preface in terms of also, you know, read your report, what you provided us as part of our budget process, where, you know, there's the public safety director is recommending a staff of 8 firefighters on staff all the time. And there's an association that would go as high as 15. I don't imagine that Port City had that estimate in place. I wouldn't imagine we'd be giving it to Sebago. And I think about your mission and the work that you do in terms of, it feels to me, and, you know, just learning this stuff, but you're kind of in a donut hole. You know, you have this, you're bigger than small, but you're not as big as, you know, the biggest municipalities. But we've got this university, go Black Bears, you nasty. We have this university, and I guess I want to see it as like, if we can live with this space for some amount of time, and then we have a conversation with the community about what is public safety, how do we articulate a vision of where public safety needs to go in our community in terms of, you know, we're all aging. We have a responsibility to our taxpayers. We have a responsibility to our students and the university and the surrounding communities, frankly. I mean, a big chunk of our work is driving out of Orono, right, in terms of responses. So I think about it in terms of, you know, what can we do to live with what we have for a year if we commit to, you know, going into the next budget cycle? Because I'm going to propose, I don't put on a budget hat, I'm going to propose we talk about all the departments in order of, in terms of, you know, how do we articulate a vision as part of our budget process, get through this budget process, but how do we articulate with the community, you know, a goal for where we want our departments to go? And it seems like more is you're gonna need more space than what you have over there. And I worry about spending, my concern is short money, you know, short money today when we're gonna have bigger ambitions a year or two from now.
I understand what you're saying. From my perspective, the short money today builds the foundation
Mhm.
for where you want to go tomorrow. Unless you're agreeing, we're just gonna scrap this building, put a new one up someplace else, which
I don't think
Is it-
that's even,
is a choice, but
Yeah.
in order to understand how we would deal with even the space, we've got to have some true analysis of what is happening over there.
Could this analysis, what we have now, happen concurrently while we have a conversation about where we go? If we need to get Chief Lowe 8 office, 8 firefighters on a shift, and we need to have that conversation, can that happen concurrently? So this analysis, maybe it costs us a little more money to do this analysis, but we do it in a way where we come back to the community with, a comprehensive plan.
I think that this assessment and advice or recommendations will help as you are working your path of creating kind of the service expectations and what's needed for that.
Mhm.
And they will come together. But it also means when we go, like I said, when we go try to fix whatever is broken over there,
Mhm.
because we are going to lose the goodwill of the bargaining units at some point with 52 degrees at one point, and 80 degrees at another point. So we're gonna have to fix something.
Right.
And when you talk about fixing something over there, that is a lot of money. When we talk about the HVAC system. So our facilities manager is an HVAC person. He has licenses for HVAC. He can't, the issue is not a simple fix or a part that needs to be replaced. There is an issue with how that system is working in the building, which is now supporting a completely different level of operation and staff and activity than it was in 1996 when it was built.
Right now,
So,
the air handlers are in closets that literally were built the exact same size as those air handlers. The ductwork comes down, you open the closet door, there's the unit. So if that has to be bigger, or we need to add some kind of filtration or higher airflow rate, whatever it might be, not gonna fit in that closet. So now what do we do?
You sound like Jamie telling me why I couldn't get a bigger fridge in my kitchen because we have to do the whole thing.
Another example is the fitness area that they have right now is in a storage mezzanine that has 2 hot water heaters, the electrical service. The old abandoned copper wire switchboard thing is still there. The IT stuff is coming through. The server is in the middle of the room. The mezzanine is a suspended slab, a concrete suspended slab that isn't rated. There's, I don't know how many pounds of weights up there. If I need to move in an area that has immediate exposure to place where vehicles are stored that go to fires.
I liked what Ann had to say. I thought it was really great. I mean, I guess where I'm at is I just feel like, I don't think we don't need more assessment. I do think we need more assessment. I guess I just feel like we need a better sense from the community about what level of service we're aiming for to get an assessment. I don't know how Sebago comes in and gives us an assessment if they don't know if we're aiming to grow to double the fire size, or if we're aiming to stay, or if we're aiming to shrink. So I guess
Is part of, I mean, we have demographic analysis of the town, right? We know what the projected population growth rate of the town is. We know at least at a current service level, what we would have to do to accommodate that population growth at current service level. So I like Dan's idea of having these, the town piece, which I think is really, people would be encouraged to talk to council about this stuff, like occur concurrently with the technical assessment, because if we wait another year before we even begin a technical assessment, we've just kind of pushed it down the road. But we could, if we had a baseline technical assessment, we came back and we said, oh, the community now wants paramedicine. How do we add that into our plan? Or the community doesn't want, I don't know, improved, I don't know, something the PD, might want, how do we assess that? But for me, it just seems like if we have that conversation with the community while this technical work is being done, then we can always change the scope of the technical plan. But if we just wait, we're just waiting. And yeah.
Can you what are we talking about? Technical work? Are we talking about overall building assessment or technical as in mechanical?
I was talking about building assessment. I was talking about what Rob said when he was talking about the public works program, and he said, we had this really fruitful conversation. And I think the we was Rob and his staff and the architect or design. Right. So they're having this technical discussion while we're having this quality discussion with the community. And I think having those things happen at the same time, as Stan said, is really helpful.
So that's where, once you take a close look at the existing conditions and understand what the current situation is, and do the programming for what the current level of service is. The next phase of that would be a scenario building exercise where you would work you through, okay, if we're gonna, how do we, when you establish goals for what the project looks like for the next step, which is, so we have this known information. Maybe we need to plan for an expansion. Maybe we need to plan for less people. Either way, we can work in those scenarios and those can be priced out relatively easily because you already have sort of this baseline cost renovation, known deficiencies defined that to build on. This is sort of the foundational piece. When you're going to make an omelet, you crack the egg. You need to crack the egg.
Dan, how long do you think it would take to have a community conversation about services? 3 months, 4 months? How long is that?
Yeah, I think something, 3 months could be something, and then happening concurrently. And then for me, I'm just teasing. I don't care what we pay in taxes. I care that the people of Orono feel that they're getting their value and they feel good about it. And if people of Orono agree that, this is public safeties, we're getting the services we need, we're getting the, and they understand why it costs what it costs. Inherent in that is a conversation with the folks on Marsh Island in terms of, what their needs are and how they can be supportive. They got a lot of vacant space over there and things like that. And, I like to have big conversations about, we've got to provide public safety to this whole area. All of Orono, and that means, so those kinds of things. But I think we could do something, July, August, September, and come back in the fall and with something and do it concurrently with this. And but I want to think about comprehensively about what we're trying to do. So
we'd be having the community conversations, the sort of matrix service level option discussions, and the facility assessments kind of all simultaneously.
we often
to all
come back to the
together.
community is one big piece and say, now it's time for us to decide.
Can I ask a question, Councilmember?
Yeah.
So this will be our third community conversation on fire services alone. Are we looking at a different way to deliver this?
Yeah, it's not going to be 3 or 4 people in a room. It's going to be surveys. It's going to be, going into neighborhoods and having conversations and.
Yeah.
I think, I won't speak for other councilors, but I do want to support driving attention to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, likewise.
Will you be bringing in an outside vendor to provide that service, or is that something you expect the fire staff to go out and do?
I
I think that's something council. would
Yeah,
do a
I
lot
think
of.
this is really I think this is
It's on us.
a council conversation. Like, if we are not sure what the community wants, it's on us to
Yeah.
figure that out, right? It doesn't fall on staff. But I think what we would have to rely on then is, if we said, oh, somebody was talking about this, is this a real thing?
Yeah.
Then
Oh, yeah.
we come to you and it depends.
For the record, I 100% believe we need to expand somehow. And that's what I'm trying to get out of what staff thinks. Do you think it's a new building? Do you think, they've proposed an addition, keeping it just fire, but with that addition, keeping it fire and police, maybe with a place for, what are the I wanted to get an understanding of what staff is thinking, because I kept hearing they want to build new, we don't want new, we don't want new. Something's got to give, something's got to expand, obviously, so it's expand or new building.
Let me preface that by saying staff's job is to be able to provide a well thought out series of options to council, regardless of what the topic is. What I'm saying in we don't want new, we don't want new. It is exactly what I tried to convey in the letter terminating the contract, which is I'm not going into council ever and saying, I need a new building. I want a new building. I'd love a new building. Love to have a new office with all the gizmos that come in 2023 and not 1995. If I do that, I am not doing my job. If I make council's decision for them, I am also not doing my job. Historically here, staff has worked really hard to be able to tell you what the existing conditions are, what the array of options are ahead of you. It might be, the idea of a campus here with police, fire, and town office would be a lovely idea. I mean, at one point we looked at the building across the street as, would that make sense for a police station? It doesn't for a variety of reasons, but we tried. For me, in order to engage in a good process, we want to have an architect on board who can think creatively in ways that we are not here to think of. I mean, that's not our expertise.
Or to
And
take ideas
yes,
and generate supporting information to say, is this feasible, is it not? I don't know, we want to build, maybe we just need a building right in between here. That's where the addition happens, right? So we support both police, fire, and administrative staff here and address all kinds of different issues, but you can have those conversations with a consultant and they can say, let me go to the drawing board and I'll get back to you. And they're gonna come back and say, sure, you can do it, but it's gonna be $4.5 million. Is that something, where do you wanna go with that?
and this is how
Yeah,
many,
so-
this is what you get for that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the next phase. That's all the fun conversations happen after you've kind of dug through the dirt of what's there. And if you don't get that foundational information, you don't do the work up front, it makes those other scenarios, talking about the different scenarios, working on a budget to try to understand what the community can support. All those conversations get harder because you don't have the information to back up what scenarios you're looking to pursue. So it's just it's like ripping the Band-Aid off, whatever it might be. It's a step really that has to happen.
I'm certainly open to continuing exploration with an architect about what is needed in this space. I think it's important to be providing facilities that are going to adequately support the needs of our staff. And I also really, really love Dan's idea about involving the public as part of in a deeper conversation about what service levels they're going to want in the long term, sooner rather than later. And I think this came back to bite the town a little bit. It sounds like in a lot of ways, the process around the public works building was successful. And also there are people in town who grumble about how the public wasn't adequately consulted in that. And I think we would nip that in the bud to a great extent if we had a really good public outreach plan that council took responsibility for and really sort of front loaded as, in partnership with trying to to really meet the needs of where we as a community want to be going forward. So I think, I think there's opportunity for this to be synergistic. And my hope is that in contracting with an architect for whatever scope of work makes sense going forward, that they understand that that council and sort of members of the public are going to be doing some of this discernment around service levels for the future, in a way that we don't end up with a report similar to previously where it's constrained in a particular direction, but rather is really building toward the scenario analysis that Rob was talking about, which sounds like what we would probably want as the serious next step here.
So I think two things. I think we tried a new vendor because we're supposed to be open and transparent and give everybody an opportunity. Sebago is a vendor that we have worked with on numerous occasions. And the one thing that they do bring to the table is definitely a level of concern and experience working through top public processes. So, and they're very sensitive to what the client wants, which is part of the reason why we were comfortable going to them as the second choice here. I think the point about it's not cookie cutter is a good one. We don't want cookie cutter here. We want something that works for Orono. The point about at the same time as we ferret out structurally and operationally what needs to happen and give you opportunities to work publicly through scenarios and options and give feedback to staff to go back and have other conversations, to be having this other public process, I think makes a lot of sense and will ensure that we can kind of right size whatever investment we make. I think that the way the public gets engaged is going to be important because a lot of people can have 20/20 hindsight. And the last council had public discussions over 20 years about replacing the public works garage. So there's always going to be somebody who doesn't think we've done it the right way. So I think what's most important is for you to pick a path that you're comfortable with and can support. And I think it makes sense for us to try to do that. And I think Jeff has been trying to drive at this with his strategic planning effort that from a staff perspective, nobody is engaging. And he's tried multiple ways to get that done. And what he hears is, we love the fire department. People that show up, we love the fire department. Well, that doesn't give us an answer, right? So I think you're on a path, and I don't disagree with the path you're suggesting. I'm just telling you right now that our facilities are set up to be now, which facilities has gone through a transformation. Facilities was part of Parks and Recreation for a very long time. And we found all sorts of issues with that. And then we created the facilities department so it would get its own attention. And we put somebody in charge of that. And they are primarily focused on custodial work, which I will say, we've got an awesome custodian. They are general maintenance, like things need to get painted, small things need to be repaired. We have licenses for HVAC and plumbing, HVAC-ish.
For plumbing, for plumbing.
For HVAC. So manages all the furnaces and all of that stuff. And it was a year and a half ago that I asked Rob to take over facilities to put it in a very clear structural path with Public Works so that we could do more planning and project management that was more cohesive. So we're long-term with Rob's vision and efforts, we're gonna be able, if council will assist, get to a place where facilities is a stable draw on the tax rate. There aren't a huge number of surprises. We've got proactive planning as opposed to reactive to breakage, which we know causes an issue. So we've got internal capacity for that. I don't have an architect on staff. I don't have somebody that can plan out commercial. Yeah, you can afford one. I clearly don't have an electrician on staff. But when you're talking about systems in a public safety building, it's not like your home. And we go over $100,000 on any one of those projects, it needs an engineering stamp anyway.
You mean, so if we replace an HVAC system, I don't even know if that would be anywhere near $100 million. I mean, $100,000.
100 million, let's hope not.
That'd be a bond, that'd be a bond. But where you need a stamp if you do what? If you replace the HVAC system? That doesn't sound right to me.
The way the law reads. I forgot, I should have brought the statute number, but I forgot it, but public works projects over $100,000 required to have a PE stamp, a plan, plans, specifications, those sorts of things, when they immediately affect public safety. So not public safety in the department, but the safety of the public. So anytime you're in a building, you're doing any kind of, I mean, what the intent of the law is that, yeah, if you're just doing a basic paving job, you might, especially these days, go over $100,000 for that. You're not changing anything. You're not creating new curves that weren't there before. You're not doing anything significantly different. You're just maintaining something. Those don't meet the intent of the law. But if I were to go into an intersection and reconstruct it, change the angles of and the timing of the lights and all that, even if it didn't get to 100,000, I'd be.
But if we put $150,000 worth of new windows in this building, I don't assume we need it.
Right, if you're replacing as is kind of thing.
I don't think our HVA, so
The
my,
challenge with the HVAC system is that it's not working the way it's supposed to work. It's not providing the level air filtration, those sorts of things that we're required to by new codes. So the impact of that really should be looked at by a professional mechanical structural engineer. Those sort of things should be.
so we brought HVAC vendors in to this system. And what they're telling us is the system doesn't work for the way the building. So even if we fixed all of the little things wrong with it, it's still not going to meet the needs because it was designed for a completely different operation and significantly less people in it.
Same envelope though, right?
We don't,
It was the same.
Well,
envelope.
Totally
here's
different.
another way to say that. We don't know if we went in and replaced every single thing the way it is, as is. No, we probably would need a stamp for that, but I have no way to tell you if that's going to work or
What's the stamp? What's the?
Engineering stamp, so an
PE stamp.
engineer
So,
looks
yeah.
at it and says,
not.
I
Professional
agree.
engineer has to sign off on the plans.
Can I cycle back to something Jeff brought up at one point? Just, I was wondering, because I totally agree about the needing to be proactive and making sure that we're being proactive. You had said something about talking about our other buildings a little bit. One thing I want to be sure is that if we think that one possible scenario that's going to get talked about is relocating things to other buildings that we already have, I want to be sure that we talk a little bit about that before we hire the contractor to do this next assessment, because then I think we might need to add that this building we're sitting in needs to be part of the assessment, or you know what I'm saying? So could we circle back to this question a little about
And-
the
and I
possibility
asked
to,
Rob one more question about.
yeah,
what's
just at
the
some
assessment,
point.
then we'll
Yeah.
Get back to that.
thank you.
Do you have in this may help like kind of like frame what we were talking about maintenance versus projected needs and stuff like that? Do you have the ability right now to triage the while we're doing this community conversation, while we're doing a technical assessment, can you triage the building to keep it working? Or
Yeah, we do that every day.
yeah, So. But it's not gonna improve conditions, but it's not gonna, our conditions are not gonna degrade while we. Do,
Depending on what fails.
right,
Our people will be safe and
yeah,
the mission will be accomplished. You know,
Like I said, right now, as the building exists, as long as we don't start ripping things out. Meets the codes that it was built to meet, so.
Right.
I mean, in the report, there's some other things that I don't necessarily. It's hard for me to trust them, but,
so if the report says we need to change out this door, in your opinion, we don't need to change out the door, we could live without doing that, and you could use your resources. to-
well, I mean, an example of an issue that is that mezzanine. So
Right.
to me, the mezzanine needs to be evaluated for the weight that's on it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't meet the, if it doesn't, then they're gonna have to move that stuff. I mean, there's some things like that that are that should be looked at. I mean, is it safe? I guess. Air quality, again, we don't have any data on that, so. I mean, we could bring somebody in to do some air quality testing. That's kind of hard because you gotta. At least when we did it at the library, went through that process at the library. You have to abandon the building for a certain amount of time while they test it. You can't do that over there, so we'd have to work out how that happens, but.
So what's saying that it's bad? How did they figure? What did they do to determine that the air
Nothing.
quality is bad?
They saw that there were apparatus parked in the bay. There were penetrations in the floor that could lead to vapors from the apparatus. There's a hole in the floor where the hole goes down that you can look through.
Vapors in CO2?
diesel fumes and stuff, right, from gas.
I assume in the sleeping quarters up there, there's CO2 detectors, correct? Or that'd be a bad assumption.
So
CO2 detectors up there.
CO detectors we do have in the living quarters, yes.
So that's what I mean.
I mean, that's just like every home, right? If that's an issue, hopefully those detectors are picking it up.
It would.
So I mean, I think one of the things that's really important is a public discussion about the fact that we're not necessarily buying the conclusions that have been drawn in this report. I think unless I am a party of one, what you have is a document that's public to the world that says we have certain deficiencies that they have not provided
The Sebago, the port document or the Sebago document?
the port city document.
I feel like we're buying that we need probably some expansion, but not to that. I mean, that's not, maybe not as prescribed, but I feel like I think everyone around the table feels like we need space, probably. So there is,
I would like to have a trusted partner in evaluating what those space needs are and what the structural and safety needs of the building are, and to help us kind of move forward. And I'm not gonna go back.
The goal would be to bring the firm on and work through the progression of the scope in pieces, taking a pause at each milestone to have a conversation, you and the community. And then, the scopes can change just because we bring them on with this scope. We can keep them and bring them in for the next phase for the scenario analysis. So that builds on that. And that was the goal with Port City. We weren't just going to go through this report and then say thank you and move on to the next firm to do the next phase. You kind of want to stick with the same firm so that you're always building, you're always moving forward. Because there is a little bit of a step back if you change firms. If we move forward with Sebago, we won't be changing firms. We have enough history with them to know they have the capacity and the understanding of our community of this thing from now to wherever on vision that project will go.
I do think it'll be important at some point to connect the dots around, what Sarah was talking, got to connect all of the, I mean, there's been enough facilities discussion in the community that we're gonna have to show people how it all fits together.
So Sego can help us.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to come back to the question that's been raised a few times about, I don't have any issue about creating a comprehensive assessment of our buildings and understanding about what they're going to be used for and long-term plan. I think that's a wonderful thing. So don't hear this as pushback on that. But this idea of moving things around, that's been spoken to a few times. And so I once tried to move Parks and Rec around. I think it's had 5 offices. And ultimately, we have found success with them being here. It's one-stop shopping for people coming to do things and to have administrative things in one place, and public safety in one place, and public works in one place, library in another place. That seems to be productive in terms of community members. When they come here, they might not know who they need, but they ultimately can find who they need and pay for whatever they need, all in one place. It also allows us oversight, at least with all the administrative buildings in one place, to have consolidated internal controls so that we can ensure that our money is being managed all in one place to mitigate our fraud risk. So that's another part of it. The idea of breaking up departments, like part of police being in one place and the other part being in another place, from a supervision standpoint, we are too small. There are not enough levels to have departments broken up. When we look at breaking up administrative offices, there are too many places where a department head is managing multiple departments or aspects of departments. So when you say, could we use the Birch Street School? My ultimate goal, if we get an expansion on the library, would be lovely if the Historical Society would have a lovely place to actually be able to store and show their material as part of that expansion. And then we would be able to open up the bottom of the Birch Street School for the public to use. And they seem to like that space for birthday parties and gatherings that are smaller. When we look at even the draft of the community assessment for the community buildings assessment, the Keith Anderson comes through in many ways as being a lovely space that we can utilize for multiple reasons, right? And when we talk about adding community space in the library, at first my thought was, well, how about we just make that space a little bit bigger, and then do we really need Keith Anderson? And as we go through that process, Keith Anderson, I think, offers something a little bit different that you wouldn't necessarily want in a library space. And for a community of 11,000 people, probably makes sense to have community space at the library for those types of things and larger community space. We know that it's not our job to provide for adult education, but just signed a lease for space because they're out of space. And that is wonderful synergy with town programs, Parks and Rec and others. So when I look at the buildings that would make sense for us to have and maintain, unless you don't want to maintain them anymore, which not my decision, just my thoughts. The Keith Anderson and the Birch Street School appear to be two that fall more in the keeper place. When we talk about the old Public Works garage, it is a building that in order to even begin to renovate it, we're talking about millions of dollars. And it is in a location that is not ideal for any public service. That is, nobody is going to say, I want a community building, I'm going to site it there, right? I mean, it's not in a good location for that. So if I were making recommendations to the council, which I am not, I would list that as something we should put a for sale sign out in front of and think about getting rid of it, because not one community member had an ultimate use for that. Then we come to the Boy Scouts, and this is where it's most definitely not in my realm. But we have the old fire station. And what you're gonna hear when you get that draft report back is that the only use identified for that space in that location was the Boy Scouts. And while they came to a meeting and showed up super cute and all, I'm sorry, boys, probably shouldn't call people
It's all
cute.
right.
But folks came decked out in uniform and gave a great showing for the support to maintain that building. And the thought that they would be able to take care of it. We haven't really been able to follow up with that since. And when I think if the town council wanted to make an agreement that they were willing to put money into bringing, fixing some structural issues in that building and then maintaining it long-term, that's a choice for you to make to then lease it out to the scouts who are really the only ones that can use that building. If they're in it, they're in it. Or the other option is to, well, Rob's grandiose idea is to move it, put it on the education lot, historical society there, but, then the question is, I have no operational use for that building. And that's, I guess, where I would draw that conclusion of, I have no operational use for the old public works garage. I have no operational use for the building on North Main Avenue. I look at Keith Anderson and the Birch Street School that both would need significant investment for the town to maintain those two buildings. And ultimately, it's going to have to be the council's decision whether or not you want to make that investment. But one of the things that the town has not been able to do, as it has wanted to try to keep the mill rate down, is proactively put aside money to be able to deal with the paint on the Keith Anderson. Like, we're gonna put $60,000 on a paint job for the Keith Anderson next year. That's in your budget. Are we gonna use it? Are we not gonna use it? Gonna keep it? Are we not? How are we gonna manage that? You see what I mean? So when you talk about moving people around, I can't imagine one place that the staff is in that we would say we have too much space. Public safety is constrained at a level that is beyond what anybody else can do, right? So I can't imagine moving people around. There is, I thought about, you're sitting in the old fire pit right now. And the jail is downstairs. So I can't imagine putting police or fire back in this place. I can't imagine even moving out. Parks and Recreation might work to move two people out. I gain an office out of that, one office. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we decrease the ability for us to, staff comes together and covers Parks and Rec when they have issues. It's a lot easier to do that when somebody is melting down in front of you as opposed to 2,500 feet away. I think that the idea of, I'm up for a game of Tetris, but I just don't, in my brain, I can't figure out how to operationally make that work.
So we do have one place in town where there's some where apartments are sharing space right now, right? And that's the storage of hazmat materials out of Public Works, which has proved adequate but not sustainable, if I'm
Yeah.
understanding Chief Lowe.
So understand, when we built Public Works, part of that space, we put aside room for. Keep that in-
So police and fire both have their own dedicated storage areas at Public Works. It's fires is a little bit bigger than police.
We're talking about like half the
like
size
a-
of this room.
Garage.
But it's not operate, that's what I'm trying to say, is it's not operational space. Like, there is the ability to do some shared storage, but we can't run fire operations out of the PD or PW garage any more than you could park your loaders here and not interrupt fire department operations.
Exactly.
So maybe like that bigger. So in the context of whatever discussion we have about public safety, just understanding that I have to keep in mind that the operational needs of these spaces is more than just the physical square footage needs of some of these spaces.
I thought that was really helpful. By the way, Sophie, that's what I would really helpful to hear from you. So thank you. I think the only space that I'm not really clear what we do with is the room I'm sitting in right now. So that would be helpful if you could tell me what this gets used for and how many hours a day it's actually used, because I do know that other places, don't have a council chamber and you hold your council meetings in your gymnasium or your library or your Keith Anderson equivalent, right? But I'm sure that there's probably things that happen here I don't know. This is the one space that I've always wondered, like, how many hours a day are we utilizing this space?
So I don't clock it, but I can tell you what it is used for. In general, council always has first call on this space. But it is also used for departmental training, meetings. Our biggest conference room that we have is seats, 6 comfortably. I think Jeff has been in a meeting where we had closer to 10 and that definitely was not comfortable. So it is the general conference room for the area. We run our Zoom, because of our Zoom capability, we run a lot of the regional meetings out of here. We host police training here that allows us to get training for free because we offer the space for it. And I would say in a general, like all of the DOT, like project kickoff meetings and
Anything with more than 5 or 6 people in meetings held in here.
yeah, so I would say when I look at the calendar, we could go weeks when it's council and planning board and stuff like that. But then there are weeks when people are vying for space. It's kind of the catch-all. And like I said, we don't have other conference room kind of area space. The thing that's important about this space is the technology that we have here that we don't have at Keith Anderson. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want to put in Keith Anderson if we're opening it up for the community to use unsupervised. And so that's one thing we have here. The other thing is we have proximity to people and things here that we wouldn't have at Keith Anderson. So in the middle of a meeting, department head or anything. What? Oh, polling. What?
You get the server and stuff.
Yeah, that's the, yeah. But we have access to other people here and communications here and stuff like that. So this room, like I said, there are weeks that you are maybe the sole occupants, but that is getting fewer and further spaced out. Rob, Megan and Rob's team keep us quite busy. And I will admit, I like it because then people have to come see me.
Yeah, planning board meets here,
Tree board,
tree board meets here.
Trails committee usually meets
Yeah,
here.
all those groups.
Most of them once a month or some quarterly or.
I would say monthly, and then when projects come up, it might be more. We have also some community groups can use this space. It depends. If it's not really appropriate, we move them on to Keith Anderson.
None of those groups ever utilize the library's meeting space down there?
So the library meeting space, just so you know, the community room is packed. I actually have to now actually have them on my calendar as a an appointment or a calendar that I share. Because when I first got here, it used to be that I could call up and say, hey, I need this. Can I have the space for the appointment? I wanted to meet with Jeff on a Friday and preferred not to do it here. I wanted to do it in open space and I couldn't get in. Because it's
Tell 'em who
bad.
you were.
Huh?
Drop your name and couldn't do Jeff's name. I would use Jeff's name.
My name didn't-
Explain D&D over there.
I know.
So
There's level L with
Maybe in
our.
the evening or the day, the
Yeah.
day meeting.
so tomorrow, as an example, the community room is booked from 9 to 10. 8 to 9:30, 10 to 1:30, 2:30 to 5, and 5 to 6.
You get there right at 4, you get the long big table at Woodman's, but you gotta get there like. But no Zoom, yeah.
So, I mean, when we think about the space, the other thing, and I know it's not council's job to provide the resource for the region, but for this region, when they want to have a group meeting, Public Works or fire, managers, Maine Municipal Association wants to come up and do something. We are a place that people come to because of this space. And you think, well, it's not really our job. The thing I really like about that is I can go to a meeting with a 5-minute commute instead of a 30-minute commute or 50. And it allows
so-
me to bring into that.
Sophie, I was just going to add too that it has allowed like both police and the front desk to bring trainings in-house, and then we get the training for free, and we're able to actually have more of our staff attend because they're not leaving the property. So it's really been a great resource for us that way too.
This was fire. Where did people sleep? There's not an upstairs here, is there?
No, out back.
Or your office or
Yep.
those offices are.
So the other thing I would just kind of go off topic for just a minute, but suggest is having council engaged and interested is wonderful. It really is. I would really strongly encourage that we come to a time either individually or as a group to actually do some touring. We're happy to do that. But I think it would be good for you to maybe begin to understand a little bit more about operations and how we're set up and the things that we do.
That'd be great. I would love that.
Sounds great. That was like super, super helpful again. And I only have one tiny follow-up question, I think, quite apart from the space question, which I feel like you guys answered really, really well. Is there any reason why, as we're doing these assessments of the public safety building, I know some of the systems are interconnected, like the heating, am I correct? I don't know. You guys told me one of them. It's not the HVAC, right?
So the HVAC is not.
Right, but my point is just, is there any reason at all why we need this building assessed or parts of this assessed at the same time in order to be able to make these kind of comprehensive decisions that we're looking to make? Because I'd rather personally just do it all at once and not like have them come and come back, later. So that's my other question. Rob, maybe you can speak, or Sophie. Is there any reason why parts of this building should be assessed at the same time? Or do you feel like this one is rock solid?
I'm not gonna say yes.
Okay, not to the second. All right.
This is not rock solid,
Okay.
but I don't think we would if we got down the road, down a certain path and found that we needed to do that, I don't think coming back and adding this scope on down later would be a big issue. I think it's maybe too early to say yes or no on that. I think if it became obvious that renovating this upstairs for one of the agencies to occupy is the better solution, we can build a smaller admin building in the back, then we could come back to this location and do the necessary homework to figure it out.
Thank you.
And if there are like electrical is part of this, the boiler is
The boiler
Where,
in this.
yeah, we have the boiler for both buildings. There is electrical, but there's also been significant piecemeal work done with the electrical when we brought the generator on and some other things. So if it were me, I would start with the assessment over there and see what brings us this way. And then also, as we look at space, if that's something you want to evaluate. I also know that this is an entity that, as long as we are upfront about scope shift, they are willing to work with us on that. Yes.
What else did they work with us before on?
So Sebago does all of our traffic light and traffic planning, with the exception of the regional plan that was done on the Park Street corridor. They did the public works facility for us. They did the Webster neighborhood study for us. They've done the traffic studies.
You're our current consultant for the planning partnership.
So the PPI, the Route 2 corridor, they're our current consultant for that.
Great.
So they are project-based, with the exception of our traffic planning. That is who, when we need a traffic engineer, that is who Rob will reach out to. Haley Ward does all of our landfill and environmental work, and projects occasionally. And then Ulver Associates out of Winterport, they are the town engineer. So all the small projects that we do, any review of planning board, when we do our own minor, I say minor, Rob will say there's no public works project that requires an engineer that is minor. But they would be the engineer that does our general civil work for the smaller projects. Oliver also does all of our WPCF work. And that would include, everything from structural pumps and hydraulics to license. They work with us when we're putting license renewals through, and they do all of our CSO, our combined role with planning, as well as all of the collection systems.
So are they on a retainer with us and then we pay them by the job on top of that, or is it just always by the job?
So we only pay by the job, we pay by the hour sometimes. So like when council wanted a feasibility study done for development or non-development at Sailor, in the Sailor neighborhood, that 15-acre parcel, that is a tiny job. We're not gonna bid that job out. So we went to Oliver to do that for us. So they do, it's the bread and butter.
Yep.
And they have never required a retainer, and they have always answered our call. When we put out bigger jobs, they sometimes will bid on them, and oftentimes they will pass because they really are more like a generalist engineering firm.
So do we have a direction to go on? Are we gonna, this is what I've heard, and correct me, that council is gonna engage in a conversation with the community over the next several months to explore community vision for public safety services. And that's gonna exist currently and independently from the work that we are asking Rob and town staff to engage with an outside vendor. And we are also going to continue to do the patchwork on the building to keep it functional while we do this, trying to spend, I guess, as little as possible, because we know we may have some bigger expenses later.
I would say independent and aware, like in terms of, I don't know if you have to change the proposed scope of agreement with them for this. But I think it's maybe mention it to them, you know, doing this bit, yeah.
So maybe the timeline, like, I mean, I heard you say we could start in July, but the town's empty in July and
Yeah.
August. So I really feel like realistically, we can't start the community part till September. I don't know how other counselors feel, but I
Yeah.
think it's really hard to turn people out
Probably
till
would
September.
work better in the
Yeah.
fall.
We
And
can
I-
do our own
Yeah.
planning about
Yeah.
how we want to organize
Yeah.
that and be
Yeah.
ready to hit the ground like September 1st or 5th or whenever Labor Day is.
I would love to welcome our student residents
Yeah.
into the conversation,
Yeah.
particularly around policing and stuff like that.
So I do think it's important. Well, I appreciate and applaud and cite that you want to do the work. I do think it's going to be important to make sure that you are connecting with the staff as you do that. Because as you go out and talk about what the community wants, I think it's important to have some idea of what's in the realm of.
I think Dan's idea of having a multi-pronged approach to how we talk to the community is really important, and then we can come back and have that discussion with you, Rob, and
Okay.
Flo, and sort of talk about those.
So that's about all we have.
Yeah,
I still have to show up.
Thank you.
I appreciate the engaging community. I feel like it's a very interesting connection, like what do you want from police and fire? I think probably is the obvious. I don't think community has, we're trying to gain an insight as far as space requirements from police and fire. I don't think the community has any specific input or would be of much value there personally. So I applaud as well, going out and engaging, and we did just see our police and fire try to go out and engage, and whether they can do it differently and actually get people to engage is maybe we can, maybe we can't, but it feels a little different. It feels a little like a tangent to what's in front of us here to me. So I want to
well, I
put that out there.
I think it is. I think that not a tangent, but I think it's a pronged approach, right? I think
Mhm.
what I hear is the question being asked of the community is, what are you looking for from your public safety services? What do you want a police officer every 10 feet? I know the answer is no to that, but
On a bike.
yeah, do
You
you
pogo stick,
Yeah.
maybe, anyway.
want us to add a paramedicine program, which would then require more staff and more space for that. So I get why you want to have that conversation if we're talking about future needs, if we're going to go out and spend this much money, if it's this much more to be able to plan for the future now, it's going to be a whole lot cheaper now to do it than later. I totally get that. I have some ideas for when you talk about surveys. I think this might be a good time with some pre-planning to think about rolling out or piloting one of the, like the flash vote program or others
Oh,
that are
yeah.
aimed
Yeah.
at bringing a more statistically relevant group of responses together, which would also, we've heard that also the survey idea from the DEIB committee, we'd get 6 of them in a year if we thought about it in advance, and it wouldn't be as a waste of money as opposed to getting one survey out and spending that.
And we have a communications role change, right, with the budget, just assuming that everything goes.
So
through
just
that.
remember, it's a communications change that will bring 16 hours, not 40.
Highly valued, 60.
Yes, very, very valued 16 hours.
So
So-
Leo's point, yeah, go ahead.
So I see kind of that happening. What I am unclear of at this moment, I see the prong of council wanting to get answers about service level desires, which is great. I see the prong of Rob, keep fixing things as
That
they
right.
break.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, either
You
way.
can help, yeah.
The prong I'm unclear of at this moment is, are we gonna move forward at the same time with an assessment of this building so we can begin to support council's discussion of what should happen next?
Sort of thought we were sounding like we were going to, I thought, but I also thought like with some communication to them that there will be feedback coming from the community about service levels. So space needs could shift, or, that might change based on what kind of feedback we're getting. And to Leo's point, I agree that the community isn't going to know like what space we need, but I feel like if we came prepared with information for the community who says, yes, we want this service level, and to be able to then say to them, okay, that service level is likely to take more space, which is going to cost more when we build it. How do you feel about, this amount of possible extra money to get that service, right? So that's where I think the
Yeah.
communication back and forth, because it isn't, community can't, it's great to dream and say, I want everything. I want, the paramedic service and I want 15 firefighters and 30 police, but it's also to give them some realistic info, like that will up your tax bill by an approximate amount that we're having calculated somewhere else.
Or why we don't have an ambulance service
Right,
anymore. I mean, if
right.
it ends up, I
Right,
can't
me either.
imagine the
That
community
one,
takes
right,
us
me either, but
in that direction, but if they did, we would have a process that people could contribute to. Where,
Yeah.
when the council makes those decisions, it's not,
right. And I do think maybe we could prioritize as council and staff together, gathering some of that data about different service levels in fire department and what that would look like at different staffing levels and different, how much space would be needed and all of that, so that we come prepared. Our work we could do over the summer, even if
Yep.
the rest of the community is not, here.
So our work we can do over the summer. I would just also suggest that in Orono, September to May is the super busy season, especially for my public safety staff. So for them, this is a time when they take vacation. So I'm gonna see a dip in my available resource. And for Rob Yerxa, this is his super busy. I mean, he has a busy season and then he has a super busy season.
you get a sabbatical.
So,
Don't
But maybe
suggest.
that's another
I'm
problem.
with you. We're gonna
We gather
work
that
on your
info so
contract.
that we have it.
So I do have a memo that's gonna come out tonight or early tomorrow morning. Well, tonight, so you have time to read it. From Chief Lowe answering some of Sarah's questions and with call data that you have asked for. I just have to get it out.
Sonia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to chime in, just because I didn't want us to get lost from Sophie's question about the third prong here regarding the assessment. And so I want to make sure I'm understanding your email that you sent a few days ago in prep for this meeting, Sophie, correctly, that we have an option. The option is to be paying sort of a little bit more than half of the sort of originally proposed cost for scope of work in order to break the architect's assessment into a couple of pieces. So we're not doing the scenario assessment part yet. That's not what we're agreeing to and signing, but then we would hopefully be able to include community input in that next phase of telling them what scenarios we want further assessed. Yes, does that? I'm understanding that. We're all understanding that the same.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And, yeah, and my big concern is I don't want our town staff to do this work and then come back for approval of the contract and have to go back into another workshop because we're not clear about it. So.
Yeah.
um,
So this would be $54,000 that we are tonight kind of not voting, but giving you tacit approval to move forward with proposing. Yes?
We would put it on an agenda.
Great.
You need to sum you up on, we talked about bringing we talked about the need to have a community conversation about public safety role and get sort of an articulated vision, particularly, given this information Chief Lowe has shared with us about, a recommendation of 8 full-time firefighters, as an association says 15, and it just makes sense to really get an awareness of what the community wants for its public safety.
I'm totally for that. And, I'm happy to get an update, maybe talk to some of you individually. I don't want to take up more of a meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm an hour and 20, hour and a half late. But, I'll let you know if I have any differing thoughts from what's already been.
Okay. Great. Are we good with this conversation? Other stuff?
I think,
So can I just do an impromptu manager's report very, very briefly to let you know that we had vandalism last night at the public water pollution control facility. Yeah, folks got into it. I don't know why, but they decided, I understand the throwing things into the aeration basin that, that folks had to scrape out. What I would hope people understood is at the bottom of that aeration basin is hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of piping and filtration. But Everything looks fine at this point. They also decided to pop off the grates, so if you do walk through WPCF, there are these grates that you can wash down. And where they popped off is there's like a 6-foot drop and you're dropping into pumps and stuff like that. So staff went back through and rebolted stuff down, put new clips on. Everything looks okay at this point. Called police department. Police department made a report. There was some other kind of just nuisance stuff kind of in the roadway. Things led them to believe that they probably knew who it probably was. So the PD has chatted with folks and tried to explain that that is probably not a really smart place to make their statement of their board. I hope that we won't have any more, but I wanted to make you aware.
Physically broke into the PCF plans.
So not into the buildings,
Oh,
but
okay.
into the grounds and I mean, but there's that's a super expensive, super sensitive place to be. And in 12 years, it's the second time that we've had anything happen down there. Once somebody actually broke into the building.
I think you need a lot of protection for what they have down there. That's a good tip. So, people are just trying to get rid of it and.
They want their waste back.
Yeah.
I have one tiny question, still,
Yeah.
can I ask
Yeah,
about this actual report? I did also want to know, so it's the same engineering company, right, that works with both Port City, who we had previously, and Sebago, it's allied,
That's
right?
part of the
And-
reason why we're getting a little break on it.
And they've already done a part of the assessment, but not all, right? But they're going to continue to do that, and we'll eventually get the kind of allied report that's in the Sebago
Yes.
report. I mean, it's not in this Port City, which was an abbreviated thing, but eventually we'll get that allied report,
So
correct?
Allied, my understanding based on my conversations, which led to the letter, is that Allied came up and did an initial review and then was told not to bother to come back because everything was so old and antiquated, it didn't
I
matter.
see. Interesting. Okay, but we at least have some sense that some engineer did some look. So if something was egregiously wrong and super like urgent, we might know based on that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was curious. Thank you. Very helpful.
So there's a $54,000 that'll come back to our meeting in June. Is that how you do it? Okay.
Can we, do you think we can get Owens to? Well, it's only a week, it's only 2 weeks away. A week and a half away. Never mind. If he could get,
That's a tiny one.
oh, I don't.
Oh, did you have another question, Sarah?
I also just wanted to ask Chief Lowe directly, like on the air quality, I just want to be really sure, like, are we concerned enough about that, that you would feel better and your firefighters would feel better if we did do the kind of study that Rob was talking about, where we somehow vacated the building and really tested your air quality further? Or I just want to be sure. I mean, that seems really important to me if you're all worried about the air quality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be now, especially now that it's a known thing, I think that would be probably the best thing.
Are we talking about carbon monoxide still?
I don't know what we're
Is that
talking
the
about.
air
It said
quality issue is?
carcinogens, is what it said in the report I read. Here.
So when we talk about carcinogens, what we're talking about is we're talking about the vehicles going in and out, even though they're connected to the exhaust system, there's still some spillover. The other thing is the carcinogens that are carried back on the firefighting gear, depending on what, but it doesn't really depend, any fire we go to, we carry back carcinogens. I personally was going to ask for depending on where this was gonna go, just an air quality test in general, for at least the living quarters to understand what we have up there, so.
And so can we get a quote on that for?
But that can be, that's part of the assessment, is part of the environmental hazards, right? I would just add that.
We'll see.
I think,
Yeah.
I just
what
want
I,
to.
I might be able to move it along.
yeah, what I don't want is to have one firm doing this and another firm doing that. So I would want to put it all under one and see.
Chances are that someone that's gonna do that is someone that does that, right? And probably the firm that's doing everything is gonna hire something out. So if, I mean, I think if you feel like it's a real issue that should be acted, I don't know why we wouldn't.
So
It doesn't seem like it's a massive undertaking to have an air.
I don't think it's a massive undertaking, but I also know that everybody has had this report since October and has been content with waiting until we go through the building assessment to get it done. So I don't quite understand why we can't, if we're moving forward with the building assessment, why we can't just do it with
That wasn't my stated position previously. It was that if there were things that felt like real safety considerations that made sense to like fix right away, then we should prioritize fixing some of that right away. So I still feel that way.
I think that was mine as well. So maybe I guess what we're hearing is that it's not a major concern and that it'll come out in the wash. I guess 6-1, half dozen and others.
About which side that falls on, but I think you have the support of a number of counselors if it feels like a priority that should get dealt with more proactively.
That's, I guess, what I wanted to say too, that I
Yeah.
want to be sure that I feel like that's a priority and so whoever does it, I mean, you talk to Sophie and figure that part out. I'm not weighing in on that, but if you feel like it needs to get done urgently, I want to be sure that we address that. I feel strongly about that. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us do. So.
I trust your.
Yeah, yeah, and Rob we're gonna keep fixing.
Thanks, Rob.
One thing, we meet again tomorrow night for our budget discussion. It is the time that we do our budget wrap up, except for Public Works, which we're still discussing at our next meeting. If there are things in the budget that Sophie needs to modify, change, take in, take out, whatever, tomorrow night is that night.
So what's the expectation in terms of bringing forward some change suggestions? Is it, we write them down, Sophie writes them down as we talk about them, or do we put something, I mean, I'd like to know, like, the expected, when we vote on a final budget, it's not like where, I move to pull this money out or move that money in, it comes back to us as one.
We should really do that. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the second thing you just said is absolutely not the way we want to do it.
Right, gotta be a long day.
So like, as you guys work through things, you said, gee, I think we want to take $3,500 out of town manager professional services. Does everybody kind of agree on that? The budget as it currently stands in my working document has $3,500 taken out. We can cut $4,500 from Rob's salt budget because he got the vote, the bid in.
Yep.
That's out. When I suggest something like, I know it's not a reduction in service, but actually paying the $50,000 out of the downtown transit oriented TIF for the wall replacement. I have that as a placeholder. I'm waiting for you guys to tell me, in general, do you generally agree? I mean, councils can behave in different ways. I 100% get that.
Yeah.
In the past, it has not been like motion, vote,
All right.
formal thing. It is, we're going through, here's an idea, do we all kind of agree? And then I put together, I showed Jeff today the 3 iterations of the cuts I think you've made thus far. If you took the $50,000 and paid out of the TIF to pay for the wall, and if you implemented the ambulance recommendation that I have, which is instead of taking buying the full ambulance this year with $185,000 out of the ambulance reserve and the remainder, which is what, 109 plus 90, $199,000. That's right.
Does that sound
Yeah.
Fair
$98,000.
enough.
Sounds reasonable?
Yeah,
I don't
sure
do
is.
math in my head. What I have suggested is because the cost of ambulances has gone sky high. Chief and I had a lengthy discussion about would it make sense to elongate the life cycle of an ambulance from 6 years to 8 years, which would mean buying a new ambulance every 4 years as opposed to every 3 years. That still requires, we had been saving $75,000 a year, so we'd buy, and it was $75,000 every year.
Okay.
And now it's save. We've got money in there, got $185,000 in there because we also had some savings. And we go to buy and we need the entire 185, which is more than we would have expected, plus more, plus that 200,000. So anytime we suggest changing cycle for a piece of capital equipment, it comes with a caveat of we think, we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know if the additional 2 years, the ambulances will start falling apart and be totally not a good idea. But it's an idea we think is worth exploring. And so our suggestion was buy it this year, use $90,000 of ARPA money to be able to get us onto the plan, which still has a hit to the taxpayer of $108,000 a year. When I look at buying your next 2 cycles, which takes us out 8 years, at 3% inflation each year, so compounding, gives me a total of what we would spend, and then I divide it by 8, it comes up to 108.
You put us on that cycle for
Which would
more.
put us
Yep.
on that cycle,
Yep.
so it would be flat. So what I'm suggesting is using ARPA to get us to A,
Yeah.
to start.
So will you, I know you've seen, Jeff's seen your iterations. I think I may just not surprise everybody. I may have a piece of paper with me tomorrow. Everything we can look at, and then kind of just, I mean, because the things that I.
Great.
I think that-
I think that's fab.
What would be helpful to me, so it's not just a theoretic discussion on one of the last nights to do the budget, is if you could give it to me ahead of time, I can plug numbers in and be able to show people what that means.
So you're gonna shoot, do you have a one pager that you're sharing on the tracking what's gone on so far?
I have a 1-pager times 3,
Great,
pages,
3-pager sounds good.
3-pager,
Can I ask
just because different iterations.
Can I ask about the ambulance? Is there, what's a lead time on when you buy an ambulance?
Years, 2 years.
Before it arrives, when you order it, yeah. Yeah.
2 years? So this one that we're buying, we're getting into a year, 2 years?
Fire trucks are 4.
That's new. The 2-year piece is new.
Dump trucks are 2 years.
Yeah,
So we're gonna have this one in service for the next 2 years,
The ones that we're running right now.
which will probably put that oldest one at about 100,000 miles, correct?
It'll be over 100,000 miles.
It's about 10 a year, it looks like, and it's at 82 or something.
so the other thing I would
Right around 100, right?
encourage people, while mileage is an interesting and good idea, one of the components to look at, you're looking at public safety vehicles, awful lot of idle time, there's an awful lot of other time. So it's not like your car where you turn it on, you go.
All right, so I'll give you some, if I send you something in the morning to look at, and then when will the iterations that the two of you can just to
Are
share?
you
them?
ready for me to just share them?
Great.
Great, thank you all.
Sophie actually asked me that earlier. She had to walk me through it. I said, I don't know, maybe you should give them out at the beginning of the meeting so you could walk us all through it, but there's nothing secret in there. We can share it
So-
early and then.
It's great.
Great, then we can all walk in more
There-
prepared. Love it.
There are, it's 6 pieces of paper. They all look very similar. They are titled A, B, and C. I got really creative. A is, you'll see the spreadsheet, and then under it, the next document you'll see is a revisions list. Want to look at the revisions that actually have numbers next to them. That is where we came up with that. So revision A is subtracting out the salt, the electrician, the professional services, moving the 6,500 for Grant Road improvements to this year, and $1,000 because we moved all of the weather forecasting app to hazmat instead of Parks and Rec. So that's the first iteration. Second iteration is all of those, plus if you changed how you fund the TIF, fund the retaining wall improvement out of the TIF. The third iteration is all of that, plus if we adopted the recommendation for the ambulance.
What about the bucket truck? Was that part of the electrician? I understand.
Yeah, but
a
it's not
different-
gonna
I
impact
understand it's a different funding, but.
But it's not,
But it's gonna impact our
Infrastructure.
budget,
yeah,
what we spend.
Is it being funded out of the
What do you mean
infrastructure
it's not
reserve,
gonna
right?
impact what we spend?
So
I get the funds are coming from another source. It's not gonna hit the taxpayer, which is what we're looking at, but it
So I
does change our
think that-
budget by 125.
without the
doesn't it?
electrician, we're not gonna have the bucket truck.
Right.
yeah,
But
so
But doesn't that right now, didn't that, we have 125 from a capital line
130,
and
135.
130 in the budget.
It's
regardless of
not
where the
there-
funds
it's
are
not
coming
there.
So that is it's a reduction off our expenses.
And it's a
correct?
reduction off your revenue.
Corresponding lower.
Because
So
the
revenue
revenue is
meaning
coming
we're
in.
taking it from,
The net change is zero
but the,
to the,
expense
to the budget.
to
So the expense is down and the revenue is down.
what revenue were we getting for the 1.5?
Capital revenues?
It was from the reserve infrastructure.
Spending out of
correct?
our bank account.
It's coming out of our own bank account,
Cash
Leo, our
fund
own
balance.
reserve.
Funds are already
account.
collected.
It's real money though, right?
It is, then we're thinking about something in the future.
It's an account that we have. It's not.
Yeah.
revenue.
So I have to account for it somehow to
Yeah.
get to the bottom number, Leo. You want the 135 and to show in the expenses. I have to show it as some form of revenue in order for you to get to a net that is accurate. So we call that capital revenues, which are all the revenues or all the ways that we're funding the capital expenses that are not general fund taxes. And those catch-alls are described in detail in the charts in your capital budget.
Looking forward to more details on this subject tomorrow.
So it's interesting though, so it's, we arrive at this by consensus and then we cast one, essentially one vote.
One
If-
vote.
If you have a disagreement, you can do votes if you want, but it's in workshops, so they're straw. It's
They're
It's
not
more to
official
give
votes.
me the direction of 4 counselors like it, 2 don't, 4
Yeah.
wins over 2.
All right, I just wanted to be on record about the whole thing. I want to make it. I'm teasing.
Oh, then you wanted something for break.
I'm teasing, guys.
Looking for
Thank you
it,
for
right.
a productive discussion. Yeah, very nice.
Jeff. Jeff, it's early.
But we started 10 seconds early, so
So.
we gave